wait. Okay, now we're live. Now we're live. Okay. So once again, this is Doc Williams from Fit Lab Studios, and here we're with Owen McAteer. And where are you from, man?
Originally from Shepherdstown, West Virginia. But we're here in Winchester, Virginia, at the Athlete Academy.
Good times, man.
Yeah.
So Athlete Academy, how long has this place been in existence?
And where
are you from, man? What is this?
West Virginia. But we're here in Winchester, Virginia.
That's a weird backbeat, right?
Academy.
Good times, man. So Athlete Academy, how long has this place? Let's turn that down.
Okay, still working, I guess.
Yeah,
right.
Keep going.
All right, we've been here since February of last year.
Okay, February of last year, then you were here. Okay, and so what's your specialty then?
I would like to think it's weightlifting, Olympic style weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
We've sort of cultivated a group that's sort of stayed with me from the very beginning when I started over in Braddock Street, yeah, we do some pretty serious competition.
You can hear it going on in the background, right?
Exactly. Headed to 3 lifters headed to the American Open. So.
Congrats! I didn't know 3. Well, that's awesome, man. Okay, and you got.
I can only take credit for 1. The other 2 sort of like jumping in.
No, take it, man. You got 3 right there.
That's right.
So, how many weeks you're out? Like 2 or 3, or
2 weeks out. Or this is less than 2 weeks. It's really we fly out on Thursday.
Thursday, man.
Yeah.
All right, then that's really good.
Yeah.
So I think this is pretty timely for all of your athletes and everything.
Very much so.
Talking about the shoulder. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking about how to build a bulletproof shoulder, and we wanted to make sure that we had members active in the weightlifting community to be a part of this conversation. And there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Blessing and a curse of the internet. So.
Yeah, and it's nice to see better weightlifting videos than like it looks like it was recorded in '93 in someone's basement.
Right.
So there's a lot of high quality videos and more articles, but sometimes you get a lot of noise as well on the atmosphere.
Right. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it. We've got a quick webinar series how to do this, either if you're in your own gym, if you're by yourself, everything like that. And real quick, Owen, could you talk about your background, either in healthcare and this as well?
Yeah, I work with physical therapy, 2 new physical therapy. My job now is their strength and conditioning specialist. I've been in strength and conditioning specialist for about 15 years, 12, 15 years, and then it's really,
that's a lot, man.
That's just long experience, I guess, throughout. So
you got it, man.
Yeah,
you got it. Then what we'll do is we'll go right into it. You're going to see on your screen in 1 second. I'm going to switch over. Hold on, you've got microphone there. Get a little bit better quality in a second. No, let's stick with this one instead. This one sounds fine, and I'm going to go into presenting mode. Okay, and my desktop, you're going to see the echoes in a second, blah, blah, blah. And okay, and start screen share. Okay, so from this, we're going to go into about the webinar and everything like that, and see what's going on. Someone just opted in to see this video as well, so we'll see what happens. Okay, so let's get this up and running, shall we? Let's see. View, edit. Let's look in there. Better. Slideshow. Let's start from the first one. So we're going to go back in. So we already talked about why we're doing this. And, of course, Lonely Boy Barbell, just newly acquired name?
Newly changed, yes.
Very nice. Very nice. So I love it, man. Very unique. Very unique. So real quick about presenting, we just interviewed Owen McAteer that will be on this live call as well. But also, my name is Doc Williams, so I have a background in physical therapy, biomechanics, and massage therapy. And I've been in experienced coaching for beginners and advanced athletes. And we actually opened up boxes around the same time, about 6 months before me, right?
Yeah, a little bit Yeah, you were up in Hagerstown. I was in Winchester.
Yeah,
I've
man.
been in Winchester, so.
Yeah, so a lot to deal with weightlifting, a lot to deal with CrossFitters, everything like that. And I had the pleasure to work with the DC Brawlers for the last 2 years as their massage therapist, as well as going to the Strength Spectacular with Travis Mash, and started doing articles for ESPN and ESPNW and SweatRx and Muscle and Fitness when I was younger. Did you know that I was into Muscle and Fitness? I was in a before and after. When I was like 18. Yeah, I was
I did not.
I was a fat child. Yeah, there was a before and after shot of that one.
Hey,
It was about,
as long as you change, that's
I'm trying not to go back. I'm trying not to go back. But you know, tomorrow we'll see what happens. I like cake. I enjoy cake. So we're gonna talk about the mystery behind shoulder strength, and we touched upon it a little bit, but too much confusion. Now, what have you seen with mobility wise?
The biggest thing with mobility is that it's sort of misuse, or it's just overemphasis. A lot of people just feel like the mobility side of things is kind of, that's it, and they need mobility in their shoulders or something like that. Except you see a lot of people that can probably put their wrap their arm around their head and turn it into a hula hoop, and that's obviously not a mobility issue. It's actually a stability issue. It's actually the opposite, where they need to be tightening the muscle around the shoulder itself, as well as there's the other one that we talked about earlier, was motor control.
Yeah.
And so those are the big ones that we always see. Yes, obviously mobility probably one of the top offenders, but stability is probably another one that's a big one, and it doesn't get addressed. So
yeah, it's true. So it's sometimes just in the community, people use it as a buzzword, mobility. Sure. They need it. Yeah. But they don't really quite know what's going on with it.
I mean, the big thing was with Kelly Starrett and saying mobility WOD or mobility something. He's not saying that all that mobility is your end all be all. You all have to be individuals and not kind of like just adhere to certain principles. Some of you may not need mobility. You may have mobility, and you may feel like you need more mobility, but in reality, you actually need stability.
Exactly. That's very true. That's very true. So looking at this, we're also going to be talking about some of the things that we see, some of the apparatus when they're trying to do it. You hear foam rollers, almost anything. Yeah. People are like, okay, foam roll that out. Sometimes scapula, all that stuff, or you'll hear lacrosse balls, all that kind of stuff. That's sometimes a good thing to have for trigger points, but once again, in moderation. And why are you using it? What are you doing?
As long as its application is a necessity, is needed, then yes, obviously use it. But don't try to think that this is the thing that you do every single time afterwards if there's some other overlying issue going on.
Yeah, it's true. And the last one that we hear, besides we'll get to gimmicks, but a lot of times people love hearing like, I've got a new remote trainer. They're going to be doing something. This program is really going to work. And they just think that having a remote program or someone watching them is going to fix everything. Right. So we're going to talk about it can be useful, but we've got to look for the outliers. So real quick, we're going to look at the blueprint of talking about build a bulletproof shoulder. And really there's 4 main attributes. We're going to look at levels of motor control, chain reaction movement patterns, assessment portions, and then identifying weaknesses. So we're going to jump into the first one. And a lot of times we see people that think there's only mobility and then you have the skill. They go and say, well,
once you get the mobility, you can practice the skill.
Exactly. Yeah. But not so much.
Not the case.
Very
rarely the case.
Yeah, unless you have some prior background or something, it's just not going to work that way. So one is to identify what's going on. There's 4 main portions. Mobility, the one that we hear all the time with functional range of motion. But I think the middle 2, where it's talking about the stability and then also the controlled mobility, is left out.
Yeah, I like there was the Barbell Shrug interviewed Jean Pinot, And he said that mobility under load, which was a great concept that not a lot of people think about. And that's just basically, that's if you have the ability to articulate the shoulder as you move up and down, unlike an overhead squat per se. So it's a matter of, if you don't have that, then it's not necessarily, again, a mobility issue. But like you said, it's maybe a motor control. It may be stability. It's maybe you don't have the stability in the shoulder to actually make sure that that stays in its proper positioning. So you're spot on with all of that.
And going from there, then you go into, there's actually another step before the skill, talking about that controlled mobility. Almost like, okay, well, we have the stability to lock out or to be under load. Then that you have to go with, I call it almost the transitional period, right? So if we're working on a overhead squat, well, now we have the stability, we have the range of motion to hold the overhead squat, but how is our mechanics when we go down to the bottom of the squat? If you're all over the place, your thoracic spine, your midsection is all over the place, we need to work on that controlled mobility before we get to that skill and do it multiple times. So because there's so many facets of this, we're going to focus just on this one, stability. And that's the best place to start, because we can't get any farther unless we do that.
Unless it's there.
So we talked about having the mobility and then stability, but also knowing the anatomy of the shoulder first and foremost. We see, how many athletes do you think really start pouring into knowing how their body actually works or even looks like under the skin?
I think a lot of that truly should fall on the coach more than the athlete. With a lot of weightlifting, I don't want them to think about, retracting their scapula or something like that, or kind of like making sure that they're flexing the right muscles and stuff like that. I want them to feel it. I want them to know what it feels like, but I don't necessarily need them to think about it at that time, because I'm really concentrating. They need to concentrate on the movement itself. So in reality, I feel like the anatomy of something should fall on the coach more than anything. And knowing, if you talk about the shoulder, knowing your sits model and knowing, and knowing what that is, and and then also knowing sort of the covering muscles of the rotator cuff, and then what kind of like what each part of the muscle does in terms of its function, which muscles move on flexion, which muscles move on abduction. So it's a matter of, if you know that anatomy and you can recognize that anatomy, especially based on the movement, then you can start to break down what the actual problem is or where the problem is coming from. And then like we were talking about, you can start to address whether or not it is stability of that particular muscle group, or the mobility, or is it motor control, or is it mobility under load? Is it, it's all these things that you just sort of, you try to you have to look at it as pointillism, as, this is a big picture made up of little dots.
Exactly.
So,
and that's a good segue. So having those dots we have on the screen, we have 1 through 3. All of those points you have to be able to articulate, know what's going on to be more effective. Now, either being a coach where your job is to make someone more efficient, or if you're one of those lifters that are going to be by themselves and want to become more proficient in movement, and they need to know the tools.
Especially if you're kind of on your own. You as an athlete, you should probably recognize sort of where your kind of like your problem areas are, and then and obviously I would always recommend getting a coach or something like that, but at the same time, you just doing research towards it you can recognize and bring up a bunch of different issues. Not necessarily in that order, though. So that's the big thing. So
exactly, very nice.
Damn, sorry about
that. So when we go through that, that's a perfect segue. So we had the anatomy, the 3 joints. The 3 joints being the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder. And the next slide breaks down the target area. We start from distal, which means all the way out, and then going back in. So the chain reaction for the build to stability, we have the wrist, the carpals, radius, and ulna. So the carpal is just those little tiny muscles or bones in the wrist.
And you're talking about the bones, and you're talking about sort of just the structural pieces of it,
exactly.
The actual architecture.
And then we go back up, and then we have the ulna and the humerus. So we're talking about the elbow joint. And then we go back up to the main part where we're talking about the shoulder girdle, the scapula and humerus and everything like that. And then you mentioned before talking about all of the sits muscles, which is the rotator cuff.
Yeah, so it's the sits model is supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and then subscap.
There we go.
So if you start to recognize all of those little pieces, know exactly what they do, and they sort of what muscles and then what movement they actually reflect upon, then you can actually start to recognize kind of the issue of, like, say if you have pain and then you move in a certain direction, then you can kind of start to get a breakdown. Now, obviously you're not a doctor, so it's a matter of you're not going to be able to recognize it right away or probably have the most accurate diagnosis, but you get a general idea.
Very nice.
So if you're not going to a doctor, or if you're just kind of you know, you're having just some tenderness issues or something like that, then yes, you probably need to recognize that there are certain muscles that act on certain movements, which, you know, is a kind of an obvious thing, but some people just don't recognize that.
Yeah, and that's a key point that a lot of people just bypass sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's very important. So we have the chain reaction to build stability. We have to have that from distal all the way to proximal, and to do that. And then with that, we have part 2, and then we go into the assessment, which you just talked about, how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's important that we're doing all of these things even before we even lift, because once we lift, we need to know how these 3 points are feeling. So once we get the feedback and assessment, then we're golden.
Right.
So the first one is, like you mentioned, online articles or forums talking about if you want to do research on your own. Now, the benefit of that is you're doing your research and you're learning something new. The problem is also it's not addressing necessarily your own anatomy, your own lever arms, because
Right.
everyone's different. Just like if you just wait until if me and Owen sit down, you see the difference. Radius and ulna and then humerus totally different depending on the person. So their lift is going to look different. So if you look at one article or one video and you look at some of the elites, if you look at them, they're T-Rexes, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to emulate that same exact style, there might be a disconnect on how efficient you're going to be with your own body type.
And the assessment is alone, you maybe you have shoulder pain in the front of your shoulder, and you sort of you self-diagnose that as, you know, kind of like a pain in your delt or your anterior delt. But actually, in reality, the chances of it is it's your bicep tendon or something along those lines. There's a lot more that goes into it than you can probably recognize, and and that's why you always need to seek this, like, medical professionals. But at the same time, you can also always educate yourself on your own mechanics and and your own anatomy.
Very nice.
So,
and if you notice, it's not ad title here. I was trying to put this in my PowerPoint, but it almost died on me. So I said, don't do it anymore. The coach, we talked about it, and then the last one is talking about the video assessment of yourself, looking at your own mechanics, not when you're trying to do it perfectly in slow motion, but you want to see it as your actual mechanics are. Yeah. You're not trying to fool yourself, you know. Yeah. You need to have reps that actually are real-time speed, what you look like, and see the deficiencies from the video analysis. Yeah. But all these things can be either acquired either cheaply, which the online, or, you know, videotaping yourself if you have your phone, and also advices from coaches. If you're in a local gym, first see how they react to you, and you'll start getting a vibe on which coach to pick, which is going to be, you're going to be invited back another time how to pick a weightlifting coach. So the last part is talking about part 4, identifying weaknesses. So first we talk about IDing the area of weakness. So that could be the 3 different joints, either your wrist, your elbow, or shoulder. Now you might say they all feel terrible. Well, you've got to address one at a time. Okay, and then from there you can build out. And the next video we actually talk about where to start. The next one is IDing the type of weakness. If you're feeling, you know, an overhead squat and you're starting to feel pain, you have to identify: is it shooting pain? Is it weaknesses? Do you feel like you have no control over the bar and you're dropping it? Quantifying that type of weakness helps you to be more adapt to find your weaknesses later on. Yeah. And then the last one we talked about, adding program progressions for that movement. And this goes back to IDing what you do bad at. So many times we hear people, they like back squat. Why do they back squat? Because they love it and they're really good at it. But sometimes if their range of motion's off in the rack position, you see some athletes who are like, you know what, I'm just not going to front squat.
Okay,
What did I say?
You said back, but that's all right.
I'm sorry.
Flip-flopped.
Flip-flopped it. You've got to work at what you're bad at.
Right.
How often do you see people, without getting guidance or someone pushing them, work on their weaknesses efficiently?
It's not as often as it probably should, but there are a lot of people out there that want to like get better themselves. The problem is that they work on their weaknesses for a little bit, and then they also work on what they're really, really strong at. The problem is we touched on the motor control and stuff like that, and it's just motor patterning. It really is, say, if you cannot retract your scapula to hold the bar in place and you're trying to snatch, then your snatch mechanics are actually off. So you don't have like you don't have tension built up in the actual back itself to actually hold on to the bar. And then, but all of a sudden you kind of say, okay, well, something's off with my snatch. Well, yes and no. I mean, it is, but maybe it's just a matter of you are not firing the right muscles. Exactly. And then all of a sudden you kind of try to strengthen that whole movement, and that whole movement is different every time, based on the fact that you can't do the same movement over again, because it's just a matter of you can't retract the scap, and you can't hold this position, or you get tired in those positions, and then all of a sudden, you know, your 10th rep feels like nothing that you had done prior to.
Nice. So breaking down the chain, making sure you're isolating the exact part instead of working the full chain and then basically glossing over that weakness possibly.
A weakness will always become an imbalance at some point, and then all of a sudden you become an imbalance, that becomes a deficiency, then that deficiency ultimately becomes pain, and pain changes movement every single time. It doesn't matter. Some people can fake it for a while, but ultimately the pain will become so great that that you will ultimately start to change how you move through time and space, and and ultimately that will set into effect this whole chain reaction of events that, all of a sudden you have pain in your shoulder, and then eventually you have pain in your knee because of it, or something like that. It's true. It is. I mean, you see it a lot where all of a sudden it's compensatory. Yeah.
So that vicious cycle continues through their cycle as they're an athlete.
Especially if it's not addressed.
Yeah. So with going through those 4 points, we're just wrapping this up, and we're on time. For once, we're on time.
I know, last time
it got a little out of control. Yeah. But we're more controlled this time. So this last one.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do this more often. I hate PowerPoint, but it kept me on track this time.
It's if timing and scheduling thing.
Dude, I'm trying to get better with my life. So the last one is to stop and think for a moment. So you can either keep doing what you're doing right now, and you'll keep going those cycles. You'll keep hitting those plateaus. You'll get weaknesses in your hip or another extremity. Or the next part is making a change and building a progression of the weaknesses. And your training is not around how strong you are. It is now trying to pinpoint every weakness, every session, to make you more efficient for your lifts. And how important is that for weightlifting?
It's everything. I mean, your efficiency is probably your number one marker of how well you lift. I mean, the best in the world, they lift with nothing for probably a couple of years before they even start to even touch weight, just because their efficiency through the movement itself. The movement is the same for almost everyone, except for the slight mechanics that you adjust based on the actual lifter's size and leg length or arm length or just limb length overall. But that's a matter of the years of training and training and training and training. The best in the world have done it forever. And it's been hammered into their heads. And that's why you kind of see this huge disparity between, kind of like the outside lifters and, sort of an American lifter that may not have been doing it for that long. And it's, it's not that it's an unfair advantage. It's just that they've trained it and they put them in schools for this sole purpose from the ages of 8. So
it makes sense.
I mean, so they've already got an advantage of 12 years on pretty much every Olympic lifter in the U.S. So,
No, you make a good point. I had one athlete, he was a jockey, and he was talking about his dad starting at 4. He would just have him do a wall sit with his hands holding a newspaper straight out like he was on a horse. Did that for 5 years before he was even allowed to start riding.
Right.
So exactly what you're talking about. Now, as we go through that, and lifters, if they've done it for a year or 5 years, we're going to just do a quick case study, which we talked about. This is from Travis Elliott. He's one of the MASH Mafia members down at Travis's MASH gym in North Carolina. He came to me talking about range of motion, especially with shoulder mobility, but also rack position. And if you notice, his functional basically range of motion for the rack was really closer to the 45-50s. And then just by doing progressions of stability training and also trigger point training, within 2 sessions of that, and he practiced it by himself off remotely for 2 weeks, he gained about 40 degrees of functional mobility.
Just huge. I mean, if you don't know how much that is, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I wish, like, the pictures are right, but I'm like, that's nothing, like, just, oh my goodness. So it's a really big deal, and it's not hard, but it's progression, it's timed out, and he spent time on this over trying to put in a lot of strength training, and it paid dividends. And now, because he can now get in the rack position, his jerk went up so much because now he has that power to go overhead. Before in the rack position, he was just,
the movement can come easier from the legs.
Exactly. So, it's we'll see him on a webinar at the end of the month, but it is possible, and people are getting these results. So if you want to learn more, you can either hit us up at, oh my God. Oh, yeah, it is fitlabstudios.com. I have like 3 domains now. I got to stop. Okay, so it's fitlabstudios.com and fitlabsproductions@gmail.com. I also have fitlabstraining.training.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so yeah, just hit me up, fitlabstudios.com, and we'll give you the manual talking about not only the anatomy and physiology, but also progressions. And some people might say, wait a minute, you just took that pitch from Grey's Anatomy? Actually, that's the 1918 edition, which is public domain, so we can use it whenever we want, so you can't sue me. Anyway, once again, next time we'll talk about how you can get into the rack position, and we'll go through the progressions of that. And thank you very much for tuning in for our very first webinar. It it wasn't that bad. What do you think?
It's good. Except I do have to make an amendment. I said Jean Pinot, and it's actually Julien Pinot.
Oh, there we go.
My bad.
Not a problem. Well, once again, that was, what was that? Maybe 4 weeks ago on Barbell Show?
It was whatever, 190, 191 or something like
That's
that.
pretty good.
But that was the best one I've had up to this point.
Yeah,
so.
It was a part 1 and part 2. It was really good. Yeah. We're going to link that over to this one as well. So once again, Owen, thank you so much for stopping by, and we're going to have you again. Congrats.
Thank you for stopping by. You're in my house.
No problem. Man, but you know what? It's all right. It's all right. And you're going to let us know how the American Open goes in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
We'll be checking in with you. So thank you very much for being with us live, and we will see you later.